Let me just say a few words about what I'm imagining. Well, we've had a few conversations already. What I'm imagining we're trying to do, at least from the point of view of a non-Aboriginal. There's a basic principle which isn't often said, and that is that that the language that humans use and the ideas in the language have to reflect reality. If they don't reflect reality, then it becomes impossible to live. It's destructive of civilization. It's suicidal in effect. If you're doing one thing and you're talking another way, it's a suicidal act, or vice versa. And you know, the residential schools were clearly an attempt to create a suicidal situation by disassociating language and content from reality. And they were successful to some extent, and in the long run were a failure, although a sort of disastrous along the way failure. But it's obvious that Aboriginal people have always worked very hard to deal with this attempt at an artificial separation between language and reality. Aboriginal people haven't been for 150 years as well organized as they are today, and getting stronger and better organized all the time, both in legal and political terms, but also in language and idea terms. And this is really an ideas gathering, which is what's so interesting about it. It's not a constitutional gathering, it's a language gathering. But this thing which is so true for Aboriginal people, of course, is true for all people, and it's true for all Canadians, whether they're Aboriginal or not. And the tragedy or the conundrum for people who don't think of themselves as Aboriginals, I'm choosing my words carefully there, you know, are stuck with the wrong language. Most Canadians are stuck with this basically garbage language, which is the stuff that came with the British and French empires. It's Eurocentric language and ideas, and they're there, and they have to use this language in order to explain what we're doing here, which actually is not European, is not actually based on European models. So, and I think there are some really, really interesting choices in this debate. Once you accept the idea that Canadian civilization is fundamentally, if it would just admit the language, is fundamentally more influenced by Aboriginal ideas than it is by European ideas, and you start to change the language of under which Canadian civilization works, then you start getting out of this division, out of this problem. And, you know, so there are real choices. There's the European linear philosophical model of the Westphalian nation state versus, you know, much more circular, non-linear models which are Aboriginal, which are able to take into account place, environment, an idea of progress, which is not the European linear idea of progress, but which is a much more circular idea in which, you know, the idea of continuity could possibly exist without it being old-fashioned, that the past and the future are one, not the opposite as they are in the European tradition. Suddenly you can make sense of our immigration and citizenship policy because you suddenly realize its roots are Aboriginal ideas of adoption and circles and so on, as opposed to people turning themselves into something that they're not. And so it's a way, this kind of conversation is a way in which Canadians can help to make sense of themselves. And so I think this conversation is a way to help pull together all sorts of strands, to render conscious a denied reality, and it could give some real force to us making sense of ourselves, whether we're Aboriginals or not. Miigwech.